Now, if the egg gets fertilized, okay, and this happens by day 21, 7 days after ovulation, where does the egg and the sperm, where do they meet in the fallopian tube? Where's that specific area called? Ampulla, okay, where that sharp bend is. The corpus luteum is still helping the endometrial growth occur, but it would normally die, right? The corpus luteum is normally going to die and create that corpus albicans. That's not good. We need to make sure that corpus luteum is going to continue to secrete estrogen and progesterone. If not, then the pregnancy is just going to die. Does that make sense? So we need to create a way to make sure that the corpus luteum is going to continue to grow, producing more progesterone and estrogen to allow the endometrial lining not to die down, not to have a menstruation when you're pregnant. Does that make sense? So we have to have a system here. Well, it would be nice if there's another thing that's going to keep the corpus luteum growing. And this other thing would be great if it's coming from a fertilized egg. Because whenever there's a fertilized egg, we want that corpus luteum to grow. If there's no fertilized egg, then let the corpus luteum just turn into a corpus albicans. And it just happens that there is something that comes out of the pregnancy. It's probably the last hormone you got to worry about in A&P2. It's called beta-human chorionic gonadotropin, or simply put as Beta-hCG. This is a hormone that gets secreted by the placenta, the growing fetus, the growing fertilized egg. And it's going to target the corpus luteum and says, don't stop growing. Just continue to keep on putting out that estrogen and progesterone. And that's what it does. It's perfect. Comes out, this beta-hCG comes out of the growing fertilized egg, and it's going to tell the corpus luteum to continue to grow. Perfect. But there's a couple problems. Okay? First off, before I tell you the problem, or actually one problem. Before I tell you this, let me also tell you something, some interesting things about beta-hCG that I know you know about, but you don't realize that beta-hCG doing this. High levels of beta-hCG are going to be is the reason why pregnant women get that morning sickness. Okay? The other thing is this. If beta-hCG only comes out of a fertilized egg, then wouldn't it be really good to know that if that only comes out of a fertilized egg, and eventually it'll go out into the urine, if we detect that, she's got to be pregnant. So that's what that is. A pregnancy test is detecting beta-hCG. Okay? Now, there is a form of cancer that beta-hCG comes out of, but it's rare, so I won't go into that one. But for the most part, that's what a pregnancy test is, a urine pregnancy test. Now, the beta-hCG does show up in the first week of gestation in the blood, but it takes about 2 weeks for it to reach the urine. So you might be pregnant the first week, but the urine won't. It'll be a pregnancy test that's urine, and it won't work because it takes about 2 to 3 weeks for that to happen. Okay? Does that make sense? All right? Now, here's the problem. The corpus luteum is going to produce estrogen and progesterone. The problem is that the amount of estrogen and progesterone is only good for about 14 weeks of gestation. Because this pregnancy gets bigger and bigger and bigger, there's not enough estrogen and progesterone that's going to sustain that pregnancy. So the estrogen and progesterone from corpus luteum is only going to be good until about 14 weeks of gestation. The first trimester is what we're going to talk about. So we've got to find another source of estrogen and progesterone. The placenta takes over. The placenta, because think about it. Baby grows, placenta grows. Baby grows, placenta grows. It's in proportion. The placenta is going to make enough estrogen and progesterone to keep the pregnancy going. Even if there's two pregnancies, like a twin gestation, you have two placentas there, or maybe one big one. And that's what's going to happen. Now, the corpus luteum will continue to be there throughout the whole pregnancy, but it's just not going to produce enough estrogen and progesterone to keep the pregnancy alive. Does that make sense? Okay? All right, so Beta-hCG is in maternal blood and urine. It's the basis of the pregnancy test, and it's also the cause of morning sickness. So here, what happens here is that Beta-hCG is going to be very high up until about 14 weeks, because Beta-hCG is going to keep the pregnancy going, or I'm sorry, keep the corpus luteum going. But then once the placenta takes over, the Beta-hCG is still going to be in the blood, but it's going to be much lower, because it doesn't need to do its job to keep the corpus luteum, because the placenta is making enough estrogen and progesterone. So the woman is vomiting, having these morning sicknesses, and she's 9 weeks, 9 weeks pregnant. I usually say to her, if it's so bad that she can't hold anything down, then we'll have to do other things. We'll have antiemetics and stuff to not make her vomit. If it's so bad, we got to hospitalize her, right? But if it's something that's tolerable, I'll just let her know. If you could, have small, frequent meals. Instead of eating, let's say, a whole peanut butter and jelly sandwich, cut it up into 4 sections. Eat one every half an hour, a section half an hour. So you're eating more frequently, but small amounts. Does that make sense? Okay? And I'll tell her this, that you'll probably need to continue this for the next 4 or 5 weeks until you're about 14 or 15 weeks, because that's what happens. I won't go into the details of Beta-hCG. I won't do that to a layman. But I would explain to them that it'll probably only be until about 14 weeks, and then it should get better. There is certain things, something called higher, where it goes beyond that, and then we got to do other things. But for the most part, morning sickness isn't something that's so bad off. We got to make sure that they're eating, but we could reassure them that it'll probably go away in about 14 weeks of gestation. Okay, and then you have to change the way you eat. Does that make sense? Hint, hint. Those are the kinds of questions I ask on exams, right? Okay. All right. So this is just explaining everything I just did during pregnancy, but you're seeing what's happening in the endometrial lining. Okay? Now, let's look at the other end of the spectrum. Menopause. In menopause, look what's going to happen here. Let me show you this diagram once more, but now let's do it. Okay. So again, you're going to have GnRH over here. This is FSH and LH, and this will be estrogen. All right? Now, this is what's going to happen here. When you get to about 50 years or 50 years old or so, the ovary has used up all its eggs. There's nothing left. And we explained all that, right? Of why that all happens. So therefore, you're not going to have any growing follicles anymore. Which means, how much of this estrogen is going to come out? A lot or a little? A little. So this is going to be extremely low. So you're going to have negative feedback saying, look, we got estrogen that's very low. It doesn't realize that we can't make any more estrogen because the eggs are gone. So because you have low levels of estrogen, it tells the anterior pituitary and the hypothalamus to secrete GnRH and FSH and LH higher or lower? Higher. So you're going to have high levels of this, and LH, but it's not going. So it's still going to target here, but there's no eggs, there's no follicles. So you're going to have low levels of estrogen, high levels of FSH and LH, due to negative feedback. Does that make sense? And we did something similar to this weeks ago when we were talking about the thalamus, or the thyroid. Okay? So does that make sense? That's how we can tell if someone is menopausal. We do a hormonal test. If you have high levels of FSH and high levels of LH and low levels of estrogen, we know what's going on. Okay? Questions about that? What, estrogen? Yeah. Estrogen never comes out of it. It only comes out, it never comes out. What are the, you know the hormones coming out of anterior pituitary. There's no estrogen that comes out of here. Absolutely none. They only come from the ovary, which parts of the ovary, corpus luteum and the growing follicle, and now also the placenta, if they're pregnant. Those are the only sources that you'll have estrogen. Well, no, they have, you also could get it from the adrenal cortex. Remember androgens? That could be converted to estrogens. You got to go back. That's what I mean. Please start studying for the final exam now. If not, better yet, yesterday. Because it's all going to come together. Okay? Does that answer your question? Yeah. Estrogen never comes out in front of the brain.
No, I just didn't know if we needed to kind of go back to do all the steps to get to estrogen.
Okay? All right? And then, again, for postmenopausal, these are just some symptoms, just to give you on here. Ovulation and menses will cease entirely, and you have these little things in here. All right? There are no, males don't have an equivalent to menopause, so we don't have that. Some people say, well, you have the midlife crisis. That's not menopausal because it's not hormonal. You know what I'm saying? So I don't want people to think that, midlife crisis for men, because women can have midlife crisis too, and it has nothing to do with menopause. So there is no male equivalent to menopause.